I was driving back home from the lawyer's office when my phone vibrated with a message from my son. "Dad, we made dinner. Come straight home. We want to hear everything." I remember I actually smiled at that text. 3 months earlier, he and his wife had moved into my house after their landscaping business collapsed under a heavy pile of debt they never fully explained to me. I let them in without hesitation, because that is what a father does. Now, stuck in evening traffic on Route 9 just outside Montpellier, I kept thinking how good it would feel to finally give him real news, something solid, something that could fix things, something that could change our lives in a single moment. I had no idea at all that they already knew. Not even a hint of it crossed my mind. Before continuing, I should mention something that I still find strange to think about. The phone call had come 3 weeks earlier on a Tuesday morning. I was in my small workshop behind the house, sanding an old rocking chair I had promised myself I would finish years ago. Retirement has a way of leaving things half done like that. Projects you swear you will return to, and then suddenly years have passed and nothing has changed except the dust collecting on the wood. The workshop phone rang repeatedly. I almost ignored it, but on the 4th ring, I wiped the sawdust from my hands and picked it up. "Mr. Calloway? This is Patricia Aldridge from Aldridge & Stern. I'm calling about the estate of Margaret Calloway. Are you the brother of Margaret Louise Calloway, formerly of Burlington?" I slowly placed the sandpaper down and sat on a wooden stool nearby. "Margaret, my sister. We hadn't spoken in 11 years. Not since our mother's funeral, when something painful was said in grief, something that should never have been spoken out loud. And after that, the silence between us just grew until it became permanent, like a wall neither of us crossed again. She had never married, never had children, and lived quietly in Burlington, where she taught high school English until retirement. I knew small pieces of her life, the way people know about someone they once loved, but lost contact with long ago, through mutual acquaintances, occasional updates, and Christmas cards that eventually stopped coming. "Mr. Calloway, are you still there?" the woman on the phone asked. "Yes, I'm here," I replied. "I'm sorry to inform you like this, but your sister passed away 6 weeks ago, cardiac arrest at her home. She was 71. She named you as the sole beneficiary of her estate. We've been trying to reach you, but the contact number we had was outdated." I stood very slowly. The workshop suddenly felt colder. The smell of pine, dust, and the quiet November air of Vermont seemed sharper than before. I could hear my own breathing clearly. "I didn't even know she was sick," I said. "She wasn't, not in any obvious way. Her doctor believes her heart condition was developing silently for some time. She likely knew. She chose not to tell anyone." That sounded exactly like Margaret. Quiet, private, almost stubborn in her silence. The kind of person who would rather disappear than burden others with her pain. "We'll need you to come in and begin the estate process," Patricia continued. "Your sister left a very significant estate. There is a lakefront property on Lake Champlain valued at around $2.3 million and an investment portfolio of about $1.8 million managed through a fiduciary. Altogether, it comes to just over $4 million. Everything was left to you. She also left a handwritten note attached to the will. Would you like me to read it?" "Yes," I said quietly. I heard paper shuffle. "For my brother Walter. You spent 32 years making sure the law meant something. I spent 30 years watching you from a distance and being proud of you without ever saying it. This is me saying it now. Use it well." I had to sit down again. My hand was shaking slightly. 32 years on the federal bench, 3 decades of decisions, cases that kept me awake at night, judgments I carried home in my mind, turning them over until I was certain they were right. And all that time, she had been watching silently. I thanked Patricia Aldridge and told her I would come to her office the following Wednesday. I did not tell my son. I did not tell his wife. I kept it to myself. When I went to Burlington, I sat across from Patricia in a narrow office with tall windows and signed papers that suddenly made me the owner of a lakefront property and an investment portfolio larger than anything I had ever earned in my entire career. My signature felt slow, deliberate. I kept thinking about Margaret teaching students grammar, about her handwriting on that note, about how neither of us had ever repaired what broke between us. On the drive back, I decided I would tell my son that night. He and his wife had been living with me for 3 months. He was my only child. His mother, my former wife Carol, had long since remarried and moved to Arizona. My relationship with my son had always been quiet but steady. No big words, no emotional displays, just presence. His landscaping business had started strong years ago, but eventually collapsed. Debt was the explanation he gave me, though the details always seemed to shift slightly whenever he talked about it. I stopped pressing him for numbers. A father sometimes accepts things without full explanations. As I turned onto my street that evening, I saw the house sitting back from the road, old and familiar, the porch needing its usual repainting. The dining room light was on. Through the window, I saw my son and his wife sitting close together at the table, leaning in a way that suggested serious conversation. I parked but did not get out immediately. Something about their posture felt off. After 32 years on the bench, you develop an instinct for tension even before you enter a room. I stepped out of the car quietly and avoided the creaking board on the porch out of habit. The window was slightly open. I heard my son first. She said it was over 4 million, all of it goes to Dad. A pause followed. Then my daughter-in-law spoke, faster, sharper. He doesn't know we know. He's going to come home thinking he's sitting on some big surprise. Walter, listen to me. If we act before he changes anything, we can control this. I stood completely still. She continued, her voice more focused now. Remember what Dr. Hess said at Thanksgiving? About your father showing signs, forgetfulness, repetition. It's not hard to argue. You're his son. You know he's not the same. We document it properly, request evaluation, and we move for guardianship. We get him declared incompetent, then we manage everything. My son didn't respond right away. He's not incompetent, he finally said. He doesn't have to be. He just has to look like he might be. I stepped back from the window slowly. My breathing stayed controlled. I moved to the edge of the porch and stood in the dark. 32 years on the federal bench teaches restraint. Emotion is information, not instruction. You observe it, you store it, and you do not act on it immediately. The law does not reward reaction, it rewards timing. I stood there for several minutes. Then I walked inside as if nothing had happened. Something smells good, I said calmly. My son smiled. Lasagna. His wife looked up quickly. How did it go? I told them it was complicated, that the estate would take time to sort out. I said I wasn't sure yet what everything meant. I gave them nothing. That night, I did not sleep. I replayed everything I had heard. The mention of Dr. Hess, the word guardianship, the certainty in her voice, the silence from my son, which was not refusal, but hesitation. The next morning, I called an old colleague, Raymond Castillo. We had worked together for years. He listened carefully as I explained everything. When I finished, he said plainly, "This is criminal, guardian fraud at minimum, possibly conspiracy." I already knew. Over the next days, I began building a record. I used a small recorder I had kept from my time on the bench. I carried it carefully. I returned to routine so no one would suspect anything had changed. I worked on the rocking chair. I read in my chair. I behaved exactly as before. In the evenings, I listened from the next room as my daughter-in-law described plans in detail. She spoke openly, confidently, as if everything was already decided. Dr. Hess, the evaluation, the guardianship petition, the transfer of control. My son participated less, but he did not stop her either. That silence mattered. Weeks passed like this. I documented everything carefully. I reviewed it with Raymond. Eventually he said, "You have enough." I called the Vermont State Police Financial Crimes Unit myself and explained everything to Detective Okafor. I handed over what I had. He asked if I was willing to let the situation continue a little longer so they could build a complete case. I said yes. I told him I agreed, but only on one strict condition. When it happened, it had to be done fully and cleanly, with no chance for anyone to reverse it or soften it later. He replied that this was exactly how they planned to proceed. We fixed the appointment for the following Wednesday. That same morning, my son mentioned casually over breakfast that he had scheduled a doctor's visit for me because he thought I had been looking a bit tired lately. He said a Dr. Hess came highly recommended. I watched my son's face as he said it, and I saw something I had been avoiding for weeks. He knew exactly who Dr. Hess was. He was repeating words that had been given to him. Behind that acting, I could still see the boy I once taught to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk outside this very house 40 years ago. Both versions of him were there at once, in the same face. I made sure nothing showed on mine. I simply said, "That's fine." Wednesday came cold and clear, one of those sharp Vermont winter mornings where everything looks peaceful through a window but feels harsh the moment you step outside. My son drove. His wife stayed at home. I sat in the front passenger seat wearing my best overcoat, a small recorder hidden in the chest pocket, listening as the trees passed by. I thought about Margaret and the way she had written her will quietly, without telling me she was dying. Many thoughts came and went during that drive. Dr. Hess's office was on the third floor of a medical building near Church Street in Burlington. The waiting room was calm and neutral, with soft colors and a small aquarium in the corner. My son sat beside me, speaking lightly about random things in a careful, practiced tone, like someone trying to appear relaxed. When my name was called, he started to stand. "I'd rather go in alone," I said. He paused. "The doctor usually prefers a family member present," he replied. I looked at him and answered, "For 63 years, I've gone to doctors alone. That won't change today." He slowly sat back down. I went in alone. Dr. Hess was in his 50s, with a polite warmth that felt rehearsed, like part of his job. He asked me to sit and opened a file. The assessment began. Simple questions, memory tests, dates, counting backward from 100 by sevens, remembering a few words and repeating them later. I answered everything without difficulty. He wrote notes I could not see. Near the end, he said, "Your son seems quite concerned about you." "I can imagine," I replied. He continued, explaining that my son had noticed changes in memory, behavior, and possible confusion. He even mentioned an incident where I supposedly got lost driving home from a store. I've lived in Montpellier for over 2 decades, I said calmly. I've never been lost on the way home. He wrote again. I then said, Doctor, let me ask you something directly. He looked up. How many of these evaluations do you perform in a year? And how often do they lead to guardianship cases? He stopped moving for a moment. And are you aware, I continued, that this entire conversation has been recorded under Vermont law since I entered your office? The change in his expression was immediate. I stood up. I spent over 30 years as a federal judge. I know exactly what this situation is, and I know exactly what it leads to. I'm giving you the professional courtesy of telling you that now. Then I left the room. In the waiting area, I nodded at my son and said, Let's go home. The ride back was quiet. The trees outside felt like they were moving in the opposite direction now, pulling us back toward Montpellier. My son kept both hands on the steering wheel, just like I had taught him when he first learned to drive. Halfway through the trip, he asked, How did it go? As expected, I said. We didn't speak after that. When we arrived, the house already had lights on inside. His wife was waiting at the door. She first looked at my son's face, quickly reading his expression for results. That told me she was not just involved, she was leading the entire situation. In the brief moment between looking at him and turning to me, I saw her change her approach. How are you feeling? She asked me. Tired, I said. I'll have some tea and rest. She offered to make it herself, and I agreed. I needed her away from the room for a while. I sat in my chair with a book while she went into the kitchen. From there, I could hear their voices. What happened? She asked. Not much, my son answered. Did he get what he needed? She pressed. I'm not sure, he said. Then her voice lowered. I'm calling Dr. Hess. I turned a page and said nothing. About 15 minutes later, she brought tea to me, placing it beside my chair with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I thanked her. She sat on the couch and checked her phone, acting casually, though I knew she had just made a serious call. That evening, at around 7:45, there was a knock at the door. Detective Okafor stood there with 2 officers and a financial investigator holding a warrant. My son opened the door. The moment he saw the badges, his expression froze. I had seen that same reaction many times in court, when people finally understood the situation they were in and realized there was no way out. My daughter-in-law appeared behind him in the hallway. She looked at the officers, then at me sitting in my chair. I saw her mind working quickly, trying to understand how everything had collapsed so fast. I stayed seated while the detective explained the warrants. My son looked at me during it, and I will admit, for a moment I still searched his face for something familiar. The child I once knew, the young man who used to fall asleep in the back seat after games, who called me from college just to talk, who stood beside me at his grandfather's funeral holding my arm. But I didn't find him clearly. Only pieces remained. He finally met my eyes. I did not turn away. My daughter-in-law was taken for questioning. My son agreed to go voluntarily. Separate actions were taken regarding Dr. Hess, who was already under review by the medical board. After they left, the house became silent in a way that felt heavy. I stayed in my chair for a long time. The unfinished rocking chair still sat in the workshop, raw wood waiting for completion. The kitchen light was still on. A cup remained in the sink. I picked up the phone and called Patricia Aldridge. She didn't answer, so I left a message. I told her I was ready to proceed with estate planning, that I needed a financial advisor and an attorney, and that I wanted to handle everything properly. I also mentioned setting up a scholarship in my sister's name and managing the Burlington property carefully. After that, I just sat in silence. In the months that followed, I kept thinking about what my daughter-in-law had once said, that a person doesn't need to truly be incapable, only to appear like they might be. The ease of those words stayed with me. The way plans can be built around perception rather than truth. Legal charges eventually followed. My son was charged with conspiracy and financial exploitation. His wife faced additional charges involving manipulation of a medical evaluation. Dr. Hess lost his license before the hearings ended. He accepted responsibility in his own way. My son received probation after partial cooperation. His wife was sentenced to prison. I did not attend the hearings. I am now living alone. The house is quiet most days. I still think about what happened, but also about ordinary things. Unfinished repairs, old memories, the lake property being managed, the scholarship slowly taking shape. My son has called twice. I didn't answer. I listened to the messages but didn't call back. In one of them, he talked about an old memory, building a stone wall together when he was 16. I understood why he chose that memory. The rocking chair is now finished. It sits on the front porch. The wood has turned pale from the cold air, smooth and silver like driftwood. I sometimes sit in it during winter mornings, watching the empty road. I think about decisions, consequences, and how life balances itself in ways that are never simple. Some things feel like victory, but carry a cost that arrives early and stays permanently. The system did its job. Evidence was collected. Truth was established. People were held accountable. That matters. I have seen enough failures in my life to understand that, and yet both things remain true at once. I sit in the cold and let that truth exist without trying to resolve it.